How, how is that possible? James Covington froze. Before him stood Sarah, the wife he'd abandoned, surrounded by three beautiful children calling her Mommy. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. She's barren. A diagnosis that was supposed to be absolute, wasn't it? Or was that the beginning of a deception far more devastating than betrayal? What secrets have been buried for 5 years? And who truly pulled the strings? Subscribe and turn on notifications to uncover the truth. Do you believe in fate or in perfectly planned revenge? Let us know what you think in the comments. The dining room in Sarah and James Covington's Soho apartment glowed under the soft chandelier light, its walls adorned with Sarah's meticulous sketches of airy interiors. The table was a masterpiece of her design, sleek mahogany, set with bone china plates and crystal wine glasses that caught the flicker of candles. Tonight was another Sunday dinner, a ritual Sarah had come to both cherish and dread. The clink of silverware and the hum of polite conversation filled the air. But beneath it all, a quiet tension simmered, ready to scald. Sarah moved with practiced grace, setting a steaming dish of roasted lamb at the table's center. Her fingers lingered on the serving spoon, steadying herself as she glanced at James, who sat at the head, his smile tight but warm as he caught her eye. Across from him, Eleanor Covington, his mother, presided like a queen, her posture rigid, her lips curved in a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The other guests, James's sister, a cousin, and a family friend, chatted lightly about the latest Upper East Side gala, their voices a practiced symphony of privilege. "Sarah, this lamb is divine," Eleanor said, her tone honeyed but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "You always bring such uniqueness to these dinners. It's refreshing, isn't it, James?" James nodded, sipping his wine. "She's a natural mother." His words were kind, but Sarah caught the flicker of unease in his glance, as if he sensed the undercurrent in Eleanor's praise. Sarah forced a smile, her heart tightening. She knew the game. Eleanor's compliments were never just compliments. They were barbs, veiled in civility, meant to remind Sarah of her place. "Thank you, Eleanor," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the sting. She smoothed her skirt and took her seat, her gaze drifting to the framed sketch on the wall, a design she'd crafted for a client's penthouse, her pride and joy. It grounded her, a reminder of her talent in a room that often felt like a stage for judgment. The conversation turned to family matters, as it always did. Eleanor leaned forward, her pearl necklace glinting. "James, darling, I was just looking through old photos of the Covington estate. Such history in those walls. It's a shame we don't have more continuity to share it with." Her eyes flicked to Sarah, lingering just long enough to make her meaning clear. "Don't you think it's time to start thinking about the future? A family to carry on the name?" Sarah's fork paused midair, her breath catching. 2 years of marriage, and the question of children was a wound that refused to heal. She and James had tried, hoped, dreamed, but nothing. The weight of Eleanor's words pressed against her chest, and she felt the eyes of the table shift toward her. James cleared his throat, his hand brushing hers under the table, a fleeting gesture of support. "We're working on it, Mother," he said, his tone light but strained. "These things take time." "Of course," Eleanor replied, her smile widening as if she'd scored a point. "But time is precious, isn't it? I was just telling a friend about the lovely women James used to know. Such elegance, such fit for our circle. Not that you don't bring your own charm, Sarah. It's just different." The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken meaning. Sarah's fingers tightened around her napkin. She wanted to speak, to deflect, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she offered a polite nod, her lips pressed into a line. The cousin chuckled, oblivious, and launched into a story about a yacht party, but Sarah barely heard it. Her mind replayed Eleanor's words, each one a needle pricking at her confidence. As the evening wore on, Sarah excused herself to the kitchen, claiming to check the dessert. Alone, she leaned against the counter, her hands gripping the edge as she stared at a single china plate in the sink, her favorite, with a delicate floral pattern she'd chosen with James on their first anniversary. She began washing it, the warm water soothing her trembling fingers. "You're enough," she whispered to herself, a mantra against the doubt creeping in. She wouldn't let Eleanor's words unravel her. Not tonight. Back in the dining room, the guests were leaving, their laughter echoing down the hall. James joined her in the kitchen, loosening his tie. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but distracted, his eyes already drifting to his phone. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, drying the plate with care. "Just tired." He nodded, hesitating as if he wanted to say more, but instead kissed her forehead and headed to the study. Sarah stood alone, the plate gleaming in her hands, its perfection a stark contrast to the cracks she felt forming in her world. In the living room, Eleanor lingered, unnoticed by Sarah. She stood by a sideboard, her fingers tracing the edge of a silver-framed photo, a faded image of the Covington family, all pale faces and stiff smiles, gathered on the steps of their estate. Her lips moved silently, a vow to herself. This family will stay as it should. The words hung in the air, unnoticed but heavy with intent, a promise that would soon set the stage for betrayal. As Sarah returned to the dining room, the chandelier flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the table. She didn't see Eleanor slip out, didn't hear the soft click of the door, but she felt it, a chill, a premonition that this dinner was only the beginning of a storm she couldn't yet name. The echo of Eleanor's veiled words from the Sunday dinner lingered in Sarah Washington's mind like a persistent fog. 2 weeks later, the Soho apartment felt quieter, as if the walls themselves absorbed the strain that had settled between her and James. The dining table, once a stage for her carefully curated meals, now sat bare, its polished surface reflecting the dim light of a single lamp. Sarah stood by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of a sketchbook. Her latest design, a community center with open, airy spaces, half finished on the page. She wanted to lose herself in the lines and curves, but her thoughts kept drifting to the unspoken pressure that had taken root. Children, or the lack of them. James entered, his briefcase thudding against the floor. "Mother called," he said, his voice clipped, avoiding her gaze as he loosened his tie. "She's insisting we see Dr. Hargrove. Says he's the best fertility specialist in the city. A family friend, apparently." He paused, then added, softer, "Maybe it's worth a try." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd felt the absence of a child as keenly as James, their shared dream of a family now a silent wound. But Eleanor's involvement felt like an intrusion, another move in her chess game. Still, she nodded, her voice steady. "If you think it's best." She turned back to her sketch, her pencil hovering, unable to draw. The weight of expectation pressed harder than ever. The next morning, they sat in Dr. Hargrove's sterile office on Park Avenue, the air heavy with antiseptic and false hope. Sarah endured a battery of tests, cold instruments, probing questions, and the hum of machines that seemed to judge her. James sat beside her, his hand resting on hers but his eyes fixed on the floor, as if afraid to meet her gaze. Dr. Hargrove, a wiry man with a practiced smile, scribbled notes, his pen scratching like a verdict. Days later, they returned for the results. Sarah's heart raced as he slid a folder across the desk. "I'm afraid it's not good news," Dr. Hargrove said, his tone clinical but not unkind. "Sarah, you have primary ovarian insufficiency. The chances of natural conception are minimal." The words landed like stones, each one sinking deeper into her chest. She stared at the folder, its pages blurring as her eyes stung. James's hand tightened briefly, then released, his silence louder than any words. "What about me?" James asked, his voice edged with defensiveness. "Shouldn't I be tested too?" Dr. Hargrove glanced at him, then back at Sarah, as if she were the sole problem. "It's unlikely the issue lies with you, Mr. Covington. We can focus on Sarah's treatment options for now." James nodded, his shoulders relaxing, but Sarah caught the flicker of something in the doctor's eyes, hesitation, or perhaps something more calculated. She pushed the thought aside, her mind too clouded with guilt to dwell on it. That night, alone in their bedroom, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, a small leather-bound notebook in her lap. She'd started writing in it weeks ago, a private refuge for her thoughts. "I'm not broken," she scrawled, her pen digging into the paper. "This isn't my fault." But the words felt hollow, drowned by the memory of Dr. Hargrove's diagnosis and James's growing distance. He hadn't touched her since the appointment, his evenings now filled with late work calls and distracted glances. When they sat for dinner, the silence between them was a chasm, the clink of forks the only sound. Sarah didn't know that across town, in a dimly lit restaurant, Eleanor was meeting Dr. Hargrove. The clatter of dishes masked their conversation as she slid an envelope across the table, her fingers steady. "Ensure James believes the problem is hers," she said, her voice low, precise. "He can't handle the alternative. It would break him." Dr. Hargrove pocketed the envelope, his nod almost imperceptible. "Of course, Mrs. Covington. It's handled." The camera lingered on the envelope, its contents a silent betrayal, revealing to the reader the depth of Eleanor's manipulation. Back at the apartment, Sarah closed her notebook, tucking it beneath a stack of design books. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and walked to the kitchen, where the floral patterned plate from their anniversary sat on the counter. She traced its edge, a ritual to anchor herself. James entered, pausing in the doorway. "We'll figure this out," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, his eyes already drifting to his phone. Sarah nodded, her smile tight, but inside a spark of defiance flickered. She wouldn't let this define her. As James retreated to the study, Sarah stood alone, the plate gleaming under the kitchen light. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the storm brewing within her home. She didn't yet know the truth of Eleanor's scheme, but the weight of it was already shifting the ground beneath her, pushing her toward a breaking point she couldn't yet see. The weight of Dr. Hargrove's diagnosis clung to Sarah Washington like a shadow, dimming the light of her Soho apartment. Weeks had passed since the sterile office visit, and the silence between her and James had grown thicker, a wall built of unspoken blame and averted glances. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, felt foreign now, its counters cluttered with takeout containers instead of her carefully prepared dishes. Sarah sat at her drafting table, her pencil hovering over a half-finished sketch of a community center, its open spaces a dream she could still control. But her focus faltered, interrupted by the memory of James's hand slipping from hers, his warmth replaced by a cold distance. The doorbell chimed, sharp and unwelcome. Sarah rose, smoothing her skirt, and opened the door to find Eleanor, her smile as polished as ever, standing beside a young woman with a suitcase. "Sarah, darling," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with false warmth. "This is Amanda Finch. Her apartment flooded. Such a tragedy. I told James she could stay here until it's sorted. You don't mind, do you?" Sarah's stomach twisted, but she forced a nod, her politeness a reflex. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. Amanda breezed past, her perfume sharp and floral, her suitcase brushing against Sarah's leg as if claiming the space. James appeared from the study, his expression caught between surprise and resignation. "Mother, you didn't mention—" he started, but Eleanor waved him off. "It's only temporary, James. Amanda's practically family." Within hours, Amanda's presence invaded the apartment like a creeping vine. She claimed the guest room but left her mark everywhere. Her scarf draped over Sarah's favorite armchair, her coffee mug, Sarah's floral patterned one, left unwashed on the counter. Sarah found her rearranging the living room shelves, moving a framed sketch Sarah had drawn for James to make space for a gaudy vase. "Just brightening things up," Amanda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sarah clenched her jaw, her fingers itching to snatch the sketch back, but she turned away, her silence a shield against the intrusion. The violation escalated at a company gala James hosted, a glittering affair in a midtown ballroom. Sarah had chosen a dress from her closet, a deep red gown from their first anniversary, its fabric a reminder of better days. But when Amanda descended the staircase, she wore the same dress, Sarah's dress, its hem grazing the floor with deliberate audacity. Whispers rippled through the crowd, and James's colleagues raised their glasses to Amanda, mistaking her for the hostess. Sarah stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly, the room spinning as Amanda laughed at James's side, her hand grazing his arm. Back home, Sarah found a silk scarf tucked into the guest room sheets, Amanda's, left like a taunt. She clutched it, her breath shallow, and slipped it into a drawer, unwilling to confront the growing storm. In her notebook, hidden beneath design books, she wrote, "This isn't my home anymore." The words bled into the page, her pen shaking with a mix of rage and resolve. The final blow came at another Sunday dinner, the table set with Sarah's dwindling energy. Eleanor presided, her eyes glinting as Amanda sat closer to James than necessary. Midway through dessert, Amanda pressed a hand to her stomach, her face paling theatrically. "I'm not feeling well," she murmured, leaning into James. Eleanor's smile widened, a predator sensing victory. "Oh, Amanda, dear," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Could it be? A little Covington on the way?" The room erupted in gas and congratulations. James's sister clapped. The cousin raised a toast and the family friend beamed, all oblivious to Sarah's stillness. She sat at the far end, her fork abandoned, her hands folded tightly in her lap. James's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, guilt flickering before he looked away, joining the chorus of celebration. Sarah's chest burned, not with tears, but with a quiet fury. She excused herself, retreating to the kitchen, where she gripped the edge of the counter, the floral plate staring back at her like a relic of a life slipping away. Unseen by Sarah, Amanda lingered in the hallway, her ear pressed to the kitchen door. Her lips curved into a satisfied smirk as she heard the clink of the plate. Knowing each small act of possession, Sarah's mug, her dress, her place at James's side, was a step toward victory. Eleanor joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing wonderfully," she murmured, her voice a conspiratorial hum. Amanda nodded, her eyes gleaming with ambition, fully aware of her role in Eleanor's plan to reshape the Covington family. Sarah returned to the dining room, her smile a fragile mask. She cleared the plates, her movements mechanical, but inside a spark of defiance grew. She wouldn't confront them, not yet, but as she stacked the dishes, her fingers lingered on the floral plate, a silent vow to reclaim herself, no matter the cost. Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent to the war brewing within her home, a war that would soon force her to choose between endurance and escape. The sting of Eleanor's announcement at the Sunday dinner lingered in Sarah Washington's heart like a bruise, deepening with every moment Amanda Finch claimed as her own. The Soho apartment, once a canvas for Sarah's dreams, had become a cage, its walls closing in with each calculated slight. The floral-patterned plate sat untouched on the kitchen counter, a silent witness to the life slipping from her grasp. Sarah moved through the days like a ghost, her drafting table abandoned, her sketches gathering dust. Amanda's laughter echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of her displacement, while James's silence grew heavier, his presence a shadow of the man who once held her close. Rain battered the windows on a late November night, the city outside cloaked in a restless gray. Sarah sat on the couch, a makeshift bed since Amanda's arrival had claimed the guest room. She clutched her leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with her resolve to endure. But tonight, the weight of betrayal was too much. She overheard James and Amanda in the living room, their voices low but piercing. "Finally, a real family," James murmured, his hand resting on Amanda's stomach as she leaned into him, her giggles sharp and triumphant. The words cut deeper than any of Eleanor's barbs, slicing through the last threads of Sarah's hope. She closed her notebook, her fingers trembling, but certain. This wasn't her home anymore. Moving silently, she slipped into the bedroom, avoiding the creak of the floorboards. She pulled a small suitcase from the closet, packing only essentials. A few blouses, her sketchbook, a pair of earrings James had given her in happier times. Her wedding ring glinted on her finger, a relic of promises broken. She slid it off, placing it on the bedside table with a soft clink, a final act of release. The red anniversary dress hung in the closet, untouched since Amanda's mockery at the gala. Sarah left it behind, a symbol of a life she no longer recognized. The apartment was still as she crept to the door, the rain's rhythm masking her steps. Her phone buzzed, James calling from the study, but she let it go to voicemail, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and freedom. She pulled on a coat, its hood shielding her from the storm outside, and stepped into the night. The city's pulse thrummed around her, taxis splashing through puddles, neon lights blurring in the downpour. Sarah walked with purpose, her suitcase a light burden compared to the weight she was leaving behind. At Penn Station, the cavernous terminal buzzed with late-night travelers, their voices a distant hum. Sarah stood before the departure board, its flickering letters a map to anywhere but here. Chicago caught her eye, a city she'd never seen, a blank slate far from the Covington's reach. She approached the ticket counter, her voice steady as she requested a one-way ticket. The clerk, weary but kind, handed her the slip of paper, its edges crisp against her fingers. "Train leaves in 20 minutes," he said. Sarah nodded, clutching the ticket like a lifeline. She boarded the train, finding a seat by the window. The carriage was half empty, its dim lights casting soft shadows. As the train lurched forward, Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching New York's skyline fade into the rain. Her notebook rested in her lap, unopened but heavy with her truth. "I'm enough," she'd written weeks ago, and now for the first time, she believed it. The rhythm of the wheels steadied her heartbeat, each click a step toward something new. She didn't know what Chicago held, but it was hers to claim, a life unbound by Eleanor's schemes or James's betrayal. Unseen by Sarah, back in the apartment, Amanda slipped into the bedroom, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She paused at the bedside table, her fingers brushing the abandoned wedding ring. A smirk curled her lips as she pocketed it, a trophy of her conquest. In the study, James stared at his phone, Sarah's voicemail unanswered, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he pushed it aside. Eleanor's voice echoed in his mind, her assurances that Amanda was the future, the right choice. He didn't know that Sarah's departure was the first crack in a foundation already crumbling under lies. The train gathered speed, cutting through the night. Sarah closed her eyes, the rain's patter fading into the hum of the engine. For the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of hope. Not loud or certain, but quiet, like a seed taking root. Chicago was a mystery, but it was hers. As the city lights vanished, she exhaled, letting go of the life she'd fought to hold on to, ready to build one that was truly her own. The rain-soaked memory of Sarah Washington's midnight train had faded into a distant echo, replaced by the vibrant pulse of Chicago's skyline. 5 years had passed since she stepped off the platform at Union Station, her suitcase light but her heart heavy with the resolve to rebuild. Now the windy city embraced her, its towering buildings and bustling streets a canvas for her new beginning. Sarah stood on the rooftop of a newly unveiled community center, her latest project, its glass walls reflecting Lake Michigan's shimmer. The air buzzed with the chatter of reporters and local leaders, their applause still ringing in her ears from the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her sketchbook, once a refuge for her pain, now brimmed with designs that breathed life into forgotten spaces. Sarah leaned against the railing, her fingers tracing the edge of her leather-bound notebook, a habit that grounded her. She co-founded a small architecture firm, specializing in sustainable designs that wove community and hope into every beam. This center, with its open atrium and colorful murals, was her proudest work yet, a haven for children, its walls echoing with laughter she'd once thought she'd never hear. A local newspaper had dubbed her Chicago's Visionary, a title that felt both foreign and earned. She smiled, the warmth of it unfamiliar but welcome, a stark contrast to the hollow ache of her New York days. Her thoughts drifted to Maya, a colleague who'd become her anchor in those early, uncertain months. Maya had spotted Sarah sketching in a coffee shop, her pencil dancing over a napkin, and insisted she join their fledgling firm. Over late-night brainstorming sessions, Maya's sharp wit and fierce encouragement had pulled Sarah from the shadows of her past. It was Maya who introduced her to David Chen, a pediatrician whose quiet strength matched her own. Their first meeting at a charity event for the Children's Hospital had been unremarkable, a shared laugh over spilled coffee. But it sparked something Sarah hadn't felt in years: possibility. David's patience had steadied her through the storms of doubt. When Sarah confided her fears about the fertility diagnosis, he insisted they seek a second opinion. The new doctor, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed Sarah's records and found no trace of ovarian insufficiency. The revelation hit like a wave, washing away years of guilt but stirring anger at the lies she'd been fed. David held her hand through the tears, his calm assurance a lifeline. Together they chose in vitro fertilization, a leap of faith that felt like defiance against her past. The result was a miracle. Triplets, 2 boys and a girl, whose laughter now filled Sarah's life like sunlight. She and David had married quietly, in a garden ceremony under Chicago's spring sky. Their vows a promise to build a family rooted in love, not expectation. The triplets, now a whirlwind of energy, had transformed their modest Lincoln Park home into a chaos of crayons and giggles. Sarah cherished every moment, from bedtime stories to sticky-fingered hugs, each one a victory over the pain she'd left behind. Tonight, the community center's opening was a milestone, but Sarah's heart was already elsewhere. David had planned a family trip to Hawaii, their first vacation as a family of five. As the rooftop event wound down, Sarah spotted him crossing the crowd, the triplets trailing behind, their tiny hands clutching balloons. They ran to her, their voices a chorus of "Mommy" that drowned out the city's hum. David reached her, his hand finding hers, his smile a quiet anchor. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked, his voice warm with promise. Sarah nodded, her heart full, the notebook in her hand a testament to how far she'd come. Across the city, in a quiet moment the reader alone witnessed, a newspaper article about the community center's opening lay on a coffee shop table, Sarah's name in bold. Its headline praised her vision, but its words carried no hint of the New York life she'd fled. In that life, James Covington sat in a sterile office, unaware of Sarah's triumph, his days dulled by routine, and a marriage that felt more like a transaction. Amanda's laughter, once a thrill, now grated, and Eleanor's assurances rang hollow. He didn't yet know of Sarah's new world, but the seeds of doubt were stirring, planted by a fleeting memory of her strength. Sarah stepped into the elevator with her family, the triplets chattering about the beach. She tucked her notebook into her bag, its pages no longer a shield but a celebration of her resilience. The city sparkled below, its lights a map of her new life. As the elevator descended, Sarah felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by the certainty of her present. Chicago had given her more than a home. It had given her herself. Tomorrow at O'Hare, they'd board a plane to Hawaii, unaware that fate was about to pull her past back into view. The hum of Chicago's O'Hare International Airport buzzed around Sarah Washington, a symphony of rolling suitcases and hurried voices. Gate B-27 was alive with the anticipation of her family's first vacation to Hawaii, a milestone etched in the laughter of her triplets and the quiet strength of David's hand in hers. Sarah knelt to adjust a backpack on one of the boys, her fingers deft as she tucked a stray crayon inside. The triplets, two boys and a girl, darted around her, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, their voices a joyful chorus of "Mommy, look!" as they pointed at a passing plane. David chuckled, pulling their daughter back from a stray luggage cart, his calm presence anchoring the chaos. Sarah stood, her leather-bound notebook tucked safely in her carry-on, its pages now a record of triumphs rather than pain. She smoothed her jacket, a tailored piece with bold patterns that spoke of her Chicago rebirth. The community center's success still lingered in her mind, its ribbon cutting a week ago a testament to the life she'd built from the ashes of New York. She glanced at David, his smile a shared promise of sunlit beaches and family memories. "Ready for paradise?" he asked, his voice warm. Sarah nodded, her heart full, unaware of the past creeping closer. Across the terminal, James Covington trudged toward Gate B-27, his briefcase heavy in his hand. 5 years in New York had dulled the spark he once carried, his days now a blur of boardroom battles and a marriage to Amanda that felt like a hollow contract. Her laughter, once alluring, now grated, and Eleanor's constant meddling left him restless. He adjusted his tie, loosened from a long day of meetings in Chicago, his mind drifting to memories he tried to bury. Sarah's quiet strength, her sketches, the life he'd let slip away. A bright red ball bounced across the floor, startling him from his thoughts. It rolled to a stop at his feet, and he bent to pick it up, its rubber warm from small hands. A boy, eyes bright with mischief, ran toward him, giggling. "Thank you, mister," the child said, grabbing the ball and darting back. James froze, his breath catching as he followed the boy's path. There, amidst the crowd, stood Sarah, radiant and unshaken, her laughter mingling with the triplets as they swarmed her, calling, "Mommy! Mommy!" in a gleeful chorus. David stepped beside her, his arm around her waist, his lips brushing her hair in a gesture so tender it pierced James's chest. Sarah's eyes met James's for a fleeting moment, a chance collision across the bustling terminal. No anger, no pain, just a calm, polite nod, as if he were a stranger passing by. She turned back to her family, guiding the triplets toward the check-in counter, her steps light but resolute. The simplicity of her dismissal cut deeper than any confrontation, a silent verdict on the life he'd chosen. James stood rooted, his briefcase slipping from his grip, clattering to the floor. The noise drew curious glances, but he didn't notice, his gaze fixed on Sarah's retreating figure, her happiness a mirror to his regret. The triplets' laughter faded as they moved toward the gate, David's hand steadying a wobbling suitcase. Sarah paused to lift her daughter, the girl's balloon bobbing above them, a splash of color against the terminal's gray. James's mind reeled, replaying the years since her departure. The ring left on the table, Amanda's smug triumph, Eleanor's assurances that he'd done right. But the sight of Sarah, surrounded by a family he'd once dreamed of sharing with her, cracked open a truth he couldn't ignore. How had she done it? How had she moved on when he was still trapped? Unseen by James, a fellow passenger picked up his briefcase, handing it back with a concerned look. "You okay, man?" the stranger asked. James nodded mechanically, his throat tight, unable to form words. He clutched the briefcase, its weight grounding him as Sarah's family disappeared into the crowd. He didn't know about the falsified tests, the lies that had driven her away, but the seed of doubt was planted, a nagging question that would haunt him back to New York. Sarah boarded the plane, her hand in David's, the triplets chattering about dolphins and sandcastles. She settled into her seat, her notebook resting in her bag, a symbol of the life she'd reclaimed. The plane's engines hummed, promising escape to a sunlit horizon. She didn't spare a thought for James, her nod at the gate, a final closure to a chapter long ended. As the plane taxied, Chicago's lights faded below, but Sarah's heart soared, tethered to the family beside her, oblivious to the storm her presence had reignited in the man left behind. The image of Sarah Washington at Gate B-27 burned in James Covington's mind, her radiant smile and the triplets' joyful cries of, "Mommy," a relentless echo that followed him back to New York. The city's skyline, once a symbol of his ambition, now loomed like a cage, its steel and glass reflecting the emptiness of his life. His Manhattan apartment, shared with Amanda, felt sterile, its sleek furniture and her scattered belongings a mockery of the warmth he'd glimpsed in Sarah's new world. James sat at his desk, the glow of a laptop screen casting shadows across his clenched hands. The memory of his dropped briefcase at O'Hare, a weight he couldn't shake. Sleep had eluded him since Chicago. Amanda's chatter about art auctions and Eleanor's calls about family obligations grated against the questions gnawing at him. How had Sarah, deemed Barren, built a family? Why had her nod been so calm, so final? The doubt that sprouted at the airport grew into an obsession, a need to understand the past he'd buried. He opened his laptop, his fingers hesitating before typing "Private Investigator New York" into the search bar. By morning, he'd hired a man named Victor Kane, a grizzled former cop with a reputation for discretion. Dig into Sarah Washington's life, James instructed over coffee in a dimly lit diner, his voice low. Start with Chicago, her work, her family, and look into our fertility tests from 5 years ago. Dr. Hargrove, Park Avenue. I need to know everything. Victor nodded, jotting notes in a worn pad, his sharp eyes betraying no judgment. James handed him an envelope of cash, the transaction sealing his descent into a truth he wasn't sure he could face. Weeks passed, each day a blur of boardroom meetings and strained dinners with Amanda, her laughter now a hollow reminder of his choices. Victor's updates came in fragments. Sarah was a partner at a Chicago architecture firm, her designs lauded for their community impact. She'd married a pediatrician, David Chen, and their triplets were born through IVF. The news twisted in James's gut, a mix of awe and regret. Sarah hadn't just survived, she'd thrived, her life a testament to a strength he'd failed to see. But it was Victor's final report, delivered in a manila folder at the same diner, that shattered his world. Dr. Hargrove's living large in the Bahamas, Victor said, sliding the folder across the table. Retired early, right after your divorce, funded by a hefty wire transfer from an account tied to your mother. James's fingers froze on the folder, his pulse racing. Victor leaned forward, his voice steady. Found a retired nurse from Hargrove's office, guilt-ridden. She kept a copy of your original medical files. They tell a different story. James opened the folder, his hands trembling as he scanned the documents. Sarah's test showed no ovarian insufficiency. Her fertility was normal. But his own results, buried in fine print, revealed the truth. A critically low sperm count, near infertility. The diagnosis he'd been spared, the lie he'd believed, had pinned the blame on Sarah. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, her assurances, her insistence that Sarah was the problem. The folder slipped from his grasp, papers scattering across the table like leaves in a storm. He drove through the city, the skyline blurring as rage and guilt churned within him. Eleanor had orchestrated it all, her manipulation a poison that had cost him Sarah. At home, Amanda barely noticed his silence, her attention fixed on a new art deal. James stared at her, seeing only the woman who'd filled the void Sarah left, a void he now knew he'd created. He retreated to his study, locking the door, and pulled out a photo from a drawer. Him and Sarah on their first anniversary, her smile bright against the backdrop of their old life. He traced the edge, his throat tight, the weight of his betrayal heavier than ever. Unseen by James, Victor's investigation had stirred ripples beyond his reach. The nurse, haunted by her silence, had mailed a copy of the files to a medical ethics board, her conscience demanding justice. In Chicago, Sarah remained unaware, her life untouched by the storm brewing in New York. She tucked her triplets into bed, their laughter a balm, and joined David in their cozy living room, planning their Hawaii trip. Her notebook, now filled with sketches of future projects, rested on the coffee table, a symbol of her reclaimed life. James sat alone, the photo crumpling in his hand. The truth was a blade, cutting through the lies he'd lived by. He didn't yet know how to face his mother, but the need for answers burned brighter than his fear. As the city hummed outside, he resolved to confront Eleanor, to unravel the final threads of her deception, unaware that the fallout would leave him with nothing but the ashes of his choices. The truth about the falsified fertility tests clung to James Covington, like ash, gray and suffocating, as he drove through a late November storm toward his mother's Upper East Side mansion. The wipers battled sheets of rain, but nothing could clear the haze of betrayal clouding his mind. Sarah's radiant smile at O'Hare, her triplets' laughter, and the damning medical files from Victor's investigation churned in his chest, a storm fiercer than the one outside. The manila folder lay on the passenger seat, its papers creased from his grip, a silent indictment of the life he'd lost. Eleanor's lies had cost him everything, and tonight he would face her. The mansion's iron gates loomed, their grandeur a stark contrast to the chaos within him. James stormed through the oak doors, the folder clutched tightly, rain dripping from his coat onto the marble floor. Eleanor sat in the parlor, a glass of sherry in hand, the firelight casting shadows across the room's antique furnishings. She looked up, her smile poised, but it faltered at the fury in his eyes. "James, darling, what's this about?" she asked, her voice smooth but wary. He slammed the folder onto the mahogany table, papers spilling out. "You lied," he said, his voice low, trembling with rage. "You paid Hargrove to fake Sarah's results. You let me believe she was the problem, when it was me all along." He pointed to the documents, his hand shaking. "Low sperm count, near infertility. You hid it to protect your precious pride, and you destroyed her." Eleanor's composure cracked, her fingers tightening around the glass. "I did what was best for you," she snapped, standing, her voice sharp. "Sarah was never right for this family. She couldn't give you what we needed, a future, a lineage. I protected you from the truth, from the shame." Her words spilled out, unrepentant, each one a nail in the coffin of James's trust. Amanda was the solution, the right choice. James laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "The right choice?" he said, stepping closer. Amanda's a leech, and you made her one. You turned me into a coward. He turned away, his chest heaving, the weight of his complicity crushing him. I loved Sarah, and you took her from me. Eleanor's eyes flashed, but her voice softened, a last attempt at control. You're my son. I did this for you. James shook his head, stepping back. No, Mother. You did this for yourself. He left the folder on the table, its truth a permanent scar, and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The rain swallowed his footsteps, and Eleanor stood alone, the sherry glass trembling in her hand, her empire of lies crumbling. Back at his apartment, James faced Amanda, her latest art catalog spread across the coffee table. He told her everything, the falsified tests, his infertility, Eleanor's scheme. Amanda's face hardened, her calculations shifting. So the boy, she said, her voice cold. He's from a donor, your mother's idea. She stood, pacing, her ambition unraveling. I was a pawn, just like Sarah. The next morning she filed for divorce, demanding a settlement that drained James's accounts. The news of the scandal leaked, whispers of fraud and betrayal tainting his career, his boardroom allies turning away. Desperate for redemption, James typed an email to Sarah, his fingers hesitating over each word. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I failed you. He sent it, his heart pounding, but the silence that followed was deafening. In Chicago, Sarah read the email on her phone, her triplets asleep upstairs. David's quiet snoring a comfort beside her. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering, then deleted the message without replying. She didn't need James's apologies. Her life, her firm, her family, her peace was her answer. The next day, Sarah joined her triplets in a Chicago park, their laughter mingling with the rustle of autumn leaves. David pushed the boys on swings while their daughter tugged Sarah's hand, pointing at a squirrel. Sarah knelt, her smile bright, her notebook tucked in her bag, filled with sketches for a new project. The past was a shadow, powerless against the light of her present. She stood, joining David, their hands entwining as the children ran ahead, their joy a melody she'd written herself. In New York, James sat alone in his empty apartment, the walls bare, Amanda's belongings gone. A single photo remained on the table, him and Sarah laughing on their first anniversary, her floral plate in the background. He traced its edge, the memory a blade of regret, his career in ruins, his mother estranged, his marriage dissolved. He saw the truth. His choices built on lies had left him with nothing. The city hummed outside, indifferent, as James sat in the wreckage of his life, the ashes of his past the only legacy he had left. And so, the story of Sarah Washington's triumph and James Covington's reckoning comes to a close, a tale of resilience, betrayal, and the power of forging one's own path. What did you feel as Sarah reclaimed her life, or as James faced the ashes of his choices? Share your thoughts with us. Your reflections bring these stories to life. Thank you for joining us on this journey, for letting these characters linger in your heart. Until we meet again with another tale, keep chasing your own light.